Chapter 44. Tidus opened his eyes, the sides of the stasis pod sliding open around him. His chest ached from the stab wound, but he was alive. He stepped out of the stasis pod and grabbed his comm screen, punching in Helix's code. 2 heartbeats later, his friend answered. Tidus could finally breathe. It had worked. "We made it," Helix said. "Looks like it," Tidus remarked. He walked out of the cargo space and stopped short. "Oh, yeah. Zion is definitely still dead. Very dead." Zion's body lay in the entryway of the morgue, just as mangled and disfigured as Tidus had left them. "Is that going to be a problem?" Helix asked. "We're not supposed to kill each other during training." "They started it," Tidus said, stepping around the splatters of blood. "If anyone really questions it, they can bring in a priest for truth compulsion. The truth is on our side, thanks to Zion's stupidity." "Right. Good." Helix sounded relieved. "Okay. See you back on the Echo." They closed the comms link, and Tidus took a breath to steady himself. He was alive. Helix was alive. Helix had come back with him, even though he would rather have died, and found peace. Tidus owed him more than his life. He had passed the trials, but now he and Helix both needed to achieve a rank. Tidus drafted a message to report Zion's death, and sent it to the station officials, then headed across the orbit station floor towards the shuttle. The station hummed with life around him, and he caught sight of Helix's signature in the time flow minutes before they were in line of sight. Helix made a beeline towards him and smiled easily as they fell into step next to each other, as if he had never left. Tidus' gut twisted. Helix had never left. That had been all him. "Congratulations on completing the 5th trial, by the way," Helix said, elbowing Tidus in the ribs. "Oh, yeah," Tidus mumbled. The memory of being drenched in his own blood, staring down at his treasonous alternate self, flooded his mind. Another version of him was with the Arachne Talam. Worse, he was part of the Cascades. It was pretty intense. "No kidding," Helix said. They stepped onto the shuttle, and it sealed shut behind them. "Hopping into another timeline was wild, right? It was like everything in the universe had been moved 3 feet to the left or something, you know?" "I actually know," Tidus said. Helix tilted his head to the side, one ear flopping quizzically. "I didn't go to another timeline. A future version of me was already here." "What? Why?" Helix asked, mirroring the bafflement Tidus had initially felt. Tidus swallowed, clenching his fists. "He was with the Arachne Talam," he said. "Part of a team, the Cascades. They're the ones, the shape changer." Helix's mouth fell open, and his eyes dilated to slits. His lip curled into a snarl as the information worked its way through his mind. Tidus could see the truth of it unfolding in his gaze. "Sedna!" Helix cursed. "I know," Tidus said with a sigh. "I killed him, of course, and I reported the base location, took the information they had, but it's a lot. Killing myself was already pretty trippy, and the other me didn't have any of that nasty baggage," Helix said, shaking his head. "I already messaged Linger about it. He's the Omni Tempore in charge of the investigation," Tidus said. "I'll be meeting with him after we get our tattoos." "Guess while you do that, I'll scope out our prey, yeah?" Helix tilted his head back. "Let's aim for ranks 42 and 41, Tidus suggested. "That'll give us more of a buffer while we work our way up." "Ambitious," Helix remarked with a grin, flashing his sharp teeth. "I like it." Tidus shot a smile back, but he couldn't help the questions in his heart. Did Helix regret returning with him? Would he come to regret it? He hadn't wanted to live in constant fear of death, and Tidus had dragged him back into it. Tidus couldn't stand the thought of Helix living miserably on his account. He had to find a way to fix this, to make it bearable for his friend. The shuttle landed, and they headed into the cathedral, side by side. They entered the sanctum where Magina Perrin and two savants were waiting for them. She held out her hands. Tidus pulled out the second dagger, the tainted traitor's weapon that he had taken from the corpse of his other self, and placed it in her open palm. Helix did the same. "Congratulations, you two," Magina said, nodding approvingly. She gestured for them to sit, and Tidus and Helix each took one of the stone chairs. The savants approached wordlessly, pulling up their shirts and inking the gold tattoos on their backs, right along their spines. "You have successfully completed the 5 trials," Magina informed them, standing reverently at the front of the room as she carefully placed the daggers on a glass pedestal. The daggers shimmered, then melted into the pedestal and vanished. "You are fully trained Timecasters. The only thing that remains is for you to claim your ranks. Until you do so, you will be a part of the Interim Legion and instructors for new trainees. You can earn a rank by claiming it yourself, or if you become the most senior of the Interim Legion and a spot opens up. If you choose to claim a rank, remember, however you go about it, the will of the Emperor must not be interfered with. This is our priority above all else." Her gaze was cold and severe as she looked at each of them, boring into their souls. "To claim a rank means to kill the Omni Tempore holding the rank you desire," Magina said. "But whatever they are tasked with at the time must not go unfinished. Is that understood?" "Yes, ma'am," Tidus replied, bowing his head. He caught Helix's gaze out of the corner of his eye. His friend's expression gleamed with confidence. Tidus took a steadying breath, carefully keeping still as the savants worked. Any Timecaster who passed the 5th trial would have killed a fellow Timecaster before, and in Tidus' case he had killed 2. But his future self couldn't kill him in return, and Zion hadn't been a fully ranked Omni Tempore. Whoever they went after next would be fully capable of killing them, and wouldn't hesitate to do so. Would working together give them enough of an edge? Magina left, apparently not interested in hanging around after giving her speech. A few minutes later, the savants stepped away, their work completed. Tidus stood and walked out with Helix. "You go have your meeting," Helix said, rolling his neck in anticipation. "I'll find out what our victims are up to. You know, once we get a rank, we'll have our own fancy ships." "With void engines," Tidus said. "Yeah, that'll be awesome. I'll find you in the library when I'm done." "You know where I'll be." Helix grinned. Tidus headed for the adjacent building and could feel the presence of Linger as he drew closer. He rolled the data file back and forth in his palm. He wished he had been able to go through it thoroughly before now, that he wasn't about to be surprised by what he and Linger would find. If he had just kept calm after killing the other version of himself, he would have had time. Instead, he had practically fallen apart. Tidus clenched his fist around the file. He wouldn't let something like that happen again. He couldn't afford to fall apart. Not ever. Especially not now. It wasn't just about himself anymore. He had to keep it together for Helix. Tidus took a deep breath, and arranged his face into a neutral expression as he entered the room where Linger was waiting. The older man sat at a desk with a hollow screen ready for the data file in front of him. He raised an expectant eyebrow at Tidus. "It sounds like you have found a break in the case," Linger said. Tidus held out the data file. "Here's hoping." "Before we begin, there's something you should know," Linger said, taking the data file from Tidus. He nodded to the other chair, and Tidus sat. "While you were traveling back from your 5th trial," Linger began, "we received a message from the Cascades." Tidus' heart sank. He shifted in his seat. No message sent by a group like the Cascades would be coming in an envelope. And, judging by the timing, Tidus himself had caused this. One more thing for the universe to lay at his feet and force him to take responsibility for. "What happened?" he asked. "They threatened to start attacking civilian population centers if we don't leave them alone," Linger said. He pressed a button on the hollow screen, and footage of another bombing pulled up. Another university location, one of the satellite programs off-world. Tidus clenched his fist, rage boiling in his veins. "They think we'll just leave a terrorist cell alone?" Tidus turned to meet Linger's gaze. "No, they don't think that. They're angry because I killed one of theirs. They won't attack indiscriminately. They're bluffing." Linger raised an eyebrow. "Explain." Tidus took a deep breath and laced his fingers together, trying to maintain his composure, even though his entire body felt like it wanted to combust. This attack wasn't about the Empire. It wasn't about strategic targets. It was about him. "Sir, as you saw in my report, there was an alternate version of myself working with the Cascades. The one that I killed for my 5th trial." Tidus started. He swallowed the dryness in his mouth and pressed forward. "I had met him before, in the timescape. I met him the first time I ever died, and many times after that as well. He gave me advice, acted like a friend, an ally, a mentor. I didn't know." Tidus paused. He flicked his eyes to meet Linger's gaze. Linger furrowed his brow and nodded for him to continue. "I've been going over the things he said, and what the shape-changer said to me," Tidus resumed. "They were trying to turn me to their side. I should have seen it sooner, but, well, it didn't work either way." "And what does this have to do with their threat?" Linger asked. "Their bluff?" "Right," Tidus said. "Well, they also, in trying to convince me they were in the right, they showed their hand. They think they're protecting people by going after the Empire, that the Empire doesn't have the best interest of its citizens in mind. I know they could have been lying, but it felt sincere, so I don't think they'll attack civilians indiscriminately." "Aren't universities full of civilians?" Linger suggested. Tidus shook his head. "I know myself well enough to answer that," he said with a grimace. "At least the Dawn Luster University, the one they've targeted, it's not full of civilians. It's only for the best, scouted and hand-picked to be geniuses serving the Empire, the kind of asset any enemy military would want to target. I think they want to hit us where it hurts, and they know we have plenty of civilians. The Empire is so big, going after those targets will never be worthwhile." "I see." Linger stared at Tidus thoughtfully. Tidus wished he would speak. Was the insight helpful, or did he just sound like a foolish child? Maybe it was too much, and he'd cast suspicion on himself again. "With that in mind," Linger finally spoke again, "how badly do you think they want to hurt you in particular, Tidus?" Tidus clenched his jaw and let out a hiss of air through his nose. "You killed one of theirs, as you said," Linger continued. Not to mention, there has been no sign of the shape-changer since your encounter during your third trial. Not only have you potentially eliminated 2 of their number, but you are the only one to have done so. Tidus swallowed the ball of anxiety working its way up from his gut. He hadn't even gotten his first rank yet, and he had made enemies, dangerous enemies, on a very personal level. Great. Remember, Tidus, Linger said, just as you have insight into them because of your alternate's involvement, they will have insight about you, particularly if they have been watching you, targeting you, this entire time. If they abandon their efforts to sway you in favor of seeking retribution, they will be formidable. There may be few things that can kill us Timecasters, but I would caution you to assume they have at least 1 more on their team. Tidus nodded. He had killed at least 1 of the Cascades, maybe 2. If his alternate self was the one trying to sway him to their side, that goodwill was gone. Now they would be out for his blood, or worse, out for ways to hurt him, to punish him. Kiun was already dead. Ilaria was as safe as anyone could be in the Empire, but he couldn't make any assumptions about what the Cascades were capable of. If they wanted to go after Ilaria, they would find a way. He would have to warn Helix. Tidus froze at the thought, his heart icing over with dread. Helix. His other self had one too. He had said as much. They knew about Helix. Helix, who hadn't even wanted to come back and live in constant fear of death, who had come back for Tidus to help him. And now he was in more danger than ever, and it was all Tidus' fault. Chapter 45. Tidus walked into the library and found Helix in their old study spot, sitting upside down with his ears brushing the floor as he studied his comms screen. Tidus swallowed the rock in his throat as he sat down next to him. He opened his mouth, then changed his mind, and reached out instead to link their minds directly through the flow of time. "There's something I need to tell you." "Okay," Helix thought back, drawing out the word. He looked up at Tidus from his awkward position. "What is it?" "The Cascades. They made a threat against the Empire." Tidus conveyed the information, trying to find the right words. "But I think, and Linger, it might be more of a threat against me, since I killed one of them, maybe 2. "Yikes," Helix responded. "We'll have to watch out for them, I guess. But wasn't that already the plan?" "Yes, it's just more dangerous now," Tidus thought. "Because I think they'll go after people I care about, not just me, and not just my family." Tidus paused, holding his breath. Helix squinted at him, then turned over so he was right side up, staring at Tidus. "Don't make me guess what you mean." The other Tidus had his own Helix. They were friends too, so they know. "Oh, I'm sorry." Tidus buried his face in his hands to hide the tears welling up there. "I'm sorry I made you come back here, and now I know you didn't want this. I'll figure something out. I can find them and get rid of them. Then they can't come after you." "Slow down," Helix thought, and put a hand on Tidus' shoulder. "I mean, yeah, this is pretty freaky news." Helix paused. "Look at me." Tidus rubbed his eyes and looked up at Helix. He bit his lip to keep it from trembling. "We can figure this out, together, right?" Helix communicated with a sharp-toothed grin. "All we gotta do is be big enough and bad enough that they're too scared to touch us, right? Seems like you've got a good start on that already, killing 2 of them." "All right." Tidus clenched his fists and blinked away the remainder of the tears. He couldn't let Helix think he was the one who needed to fix this. It was a problem for both of them, but they were in this situation because of Tidus. He needed to find a way to fix it. The first step, at least, was simple enough. They needed to get their ranks. Tidus pulled open his comm screen and scrolled through the Omni Tempore assignment list. Rank 43 was on a void incursion sweep, not the kind of operation Tidus wanted to get in the middle of. Ranks 41 and 42 were being dispatched to Lumine, a new planet. Tidus opened up the file details for the Lumine operation. The planet had been fighting against the Imperial presence for months now, costing thousands of lives on both sides. Ranks 41 and 42 were being sent in to end the bloodshed and officially bring the Luminaeans into the Empire. Tidus chewed his lip. Taking a rank could not interfere with their other assignments, so if they killed ranks 41 and 42, they would still have to end the war on Lumine. Could they do it? Well, if the alternative was facing a void incursion, Tidus would take it. And he couldn't waste time waiting for a rank to just open up. There were 12 interims ahead of him, and he needed his rank so he could hunt down the Cascades. Everyone he cared about depended on that. So, we headed to Lumine. Helix sent the thought to him, and Tidus nodded. Let's go request a ship. The Scorpion ship Tidus and Helix had obtained entered Lumine's orbit the same day a report came in of another bombing. The Dawnluster University campus on Mavrona had been destroyed. Rage seethed inside Tidus' veins. It was a strategic target by the Cascades. Not a civilian population center like they had threatened, but not an obvious military target either. And it was on Mavrona. The people there were proud of the natural beauty of their planet, and they didn't engage in any activities that would damage the environment. There were no military bases on the planet itself. Mavrona had even been known to issue harsh penalties for off-world vehicle crashes that damaged their planet's surface. This would cause a public outrage that would not be easily swept under the rug. And it was the university again. His university. The attack felt like a jab directly at him, a threat to his family. Tidus let out a slow breath to steady himself. Helix wrapped his tail around Tidus' ankle. We'll find them, his friend promised. Let's just get this job done first. Tidus nodded and took the Scorpion into the atmosphere of Lumine, landing it among dozens of other Imperial military craft. The landing zone was in the center of the Imperial presence. The sounds of battle were still audible even from this place when they exited the ship. Faint, but audible. Helix rolled his shoulders, his tail swishing in anticipation. The Luminaeans are really not taking this well, Helix said. Tidus nodded, pushing his reach with time sense so he could feel the edges of the battle that raged. The Luminaeans had been fighting for months. They were stubborn and strong enough to require a more forceful hand to be dealt with. They also had a type of magic, not particularly diverse in its abilities, but strong in its focus. The Luminaeans had a connection to their planet that let those trained to do so mold the very landscape around them. Buildings were not built on the planet's surface, but pulled into shape out of the ground, the planet itself like one ball of clay for its inhabitants to do with what they would. That had delayed things. Nothing on Lumine could be mapped for long, not if the inhabitants decided to change it. Underground passages would appear and disappear, reroute, and turn into dead ends every time they were charted. Roads vanished, buildings moved. Only the Empire's landing grounds were safe from this. Magical wards had been dug into the ground here, blocking the Luminaeans' influence. Those wards were what the Luminaeans now sought to destroy. Tidus let his time sense spread out wide and picked up the bright time signatures of the Omni Tempore. Ranks 42 and 41, Jaren and Tev. One of them was at the very edge of the Empire's protected zone, sending out threads of power to manipulate the attacks of the Luminaeans as they advanced. The other was farther out, flickering at the edge of where Tidus could sense. The time signature blinked, and when it reappeared, the Omni Tempore materialized in front of Tidus and Helix. Tidus could feel the grin behind the black and gold battle helmet. Rank 42, Tev, towered over them, his broad shoulders as wide as Helix and Tidus together.
"Well, well, well, isn't this a bold move?"
The bass of his voice reverberated in Tidus' chest. He gripped his dagger, letting his power pulse through the blade so it shone even brighter to Tidus' time sense. Whatever power had allowed Tev to teleport to them across the battlefield crackled just under his time signature, like it was charging back up.
I don't think he can teleport again right away.
Helix's gaze flicked to Tidus, then back to the Omni Tempore. The hulking man lunged for Helix. Tidus darted behind him, reaching out to feel for the time signature.
Then we'd better take care of him fast,
Helix suggested through their link. Tidus flared with power, grabbing Rank 42's arm and snaring it in a time loop so Helix could dodge out of the way. Tev's arm broke through the time loop, time particles sparking around him. His fist swung back, and the hilt of his dagger slammed into Helix's gut. The Oletheron tumbled to the ground with a heavy grunt. Tidus leapt at Tev, while the ranked Timecasters' attention was on Helix. Tidus pulled at the time around him, shattering it into fragments of reality. He grabbed onto one and pulled, yanking himself through so he landed on 42's back, his arms around his neck. "Helix!" Tidus cried out, and Helix jumped to his feet. At the same moment, Rank 42 grabbed Tidus' wrists, locking his massive hand around them, and slammed his back to the ground, crushing Tidus under his weight. Ribs cracked under the pressure, and black spots flooded Tidus' vision. Helix leapt on top of them, driving his dagger into the man's arm. He cried out and released Tidus' hands, and Helix struck again, piercing the man's neck. Blood spurted out. Rank 42 reached up, pulling at the time particles around the wound. Tidus squeezed his eyes shut, lungs screaming and ribs crackling. He ignored all of it to pull at Rank 42's time signature, snapping the threads of his rewind so the wound couldn't close. Rank 42 gurgled, his time signature flickering, and Helix stabbed his neck again, snuffing it out entirely. "Shit," Helix muttered, jumping off the corpse. Tidus opened his eyes, but his vision was murky, even with his grasp on time sense. He needed air. Helix grabbed his shoulders and pulled him out from under the massive dead weight. Tidus screamed, his ribs burning in protest at the movement. Helix clenched his jaw and held his hands over Tidus, pulling the threads of time backwards, reversing the damage and knitting his bones back together. Tidus' body convulsed at the pain, another cry ripping out of him. His vision whited out. Then it was over. Tidus sat up, panting, drenched in sweat and blood. Helix's eyes were wide, staring at him, ears flat against his head. "I'm okay," Tidus nodded firmly. "Thanks. Get his dagger." Helix snatched up the dagger from Rank 42's limp grasp and pulled Tidus to his feet. Helix had his rank now, one down. Tidus steadied himself, his vision clearing, and time sense expanding out over the battlefield once more. My turn. Chapter 46. Jaren was positioned at the edge of the Empire's warded zone, his focus on manipulating the battlefield, like a puppet master commanding an entire stage. Tidus sensed the moment Jaren noticed them coming, or at least when he acknowledged them as a threat. There was a shift in his attention, in where his power was focused. Now he was watching them. A complement of soldiers broke away from a formation, surrounding the Omni Tempore, his personal guards. Tidus nodded to Helix, and his friends split off to take care of the extras. Tidus had to be the one to kill Jaren.
"What do you think you're doing?"
Jaren snarled when Tidus came into view. The air around him shimmered gold with the combined energy of the time casting he was maintaining. Massive mandalas rotating and shifting like the gears of a clock.
"You can't sabotage my mission."
"I'm not," Tidus said with a shrug. He could see from the tension in the muscles of Jaren's neck that he had expected Tidus to attack immediately. Walking in casually threw him off. Good. Jaren didn't have the physical mass the other ranked timecaster had. He and Tidus were evenly matched in physicality. So Tidus' best option was to throw him off his game, throw a mind game into the mix to give himself the upper hand. Tidus could afford to do it because Helix, at the periphery of his senses, was holding back every soldier that tried to intervene. Jaren noticed this too, and panic flickered through his eyes. "The job will get done, don't worry," Tidus said. "Whether by you or me, well, that's up to the will of the Emperor, isn't it?" Jaren opened his mouth to respond, but Tidus didn't give him the chance. He reached out through his hold on the time flow, pushing his energy through the conduit circle, and ripped away Jaren's control. The shimmering around him vanished, mandalas crumbling away, and he let out a strangled cry. Jaren drew his dagger and lunged at Tidus, their blades ringing loudly as the weapons met. Tidus' heart quickened, pulsing blood through his veins, sharpening his senses. Jaren reached out to slow time around them, trying to trap Tidus in it, if even for a moment, but Tidus pushed back. Just the way Helix had done to him countless times during sparring sessions. Jaren slowed in front of him, and his panic turned to full horror. Blood dripped from Tidus' nose, but he pushed harder, freezing Jaren where he stood. Tidus grabbed him by the hair and slit his throat in one swift motion. He turned the body away so most of the blood splattered onto the ground, and not onto himself. Jaren's time signature flickered out as his blood poured onto the soil and emptied out of his body. He crumpled to the ground, limp, a puppet with the strings cut. Tidus sheathed his dagger and turned his energy to the battlefield. He wiped the blood from his face. Now the hard part began, finishing what Jaren had started. Tidus closed his eyes. "I'm going to find the leaders," he thought to Helix. "Cover me." "You're safe," Helix sent back. Tidus nodded, then poured all of his energy into his time sense. Everything grew sharper. Details fell into place as he let the world fill his mind. The shimmering, sandy images settled into high definition. Tidus swept through the battlefield, searching for the faces he had memorized on the way here. There, separated from each other, a distance away from Imperial forces, Tidus found them, the three most well-known leaders of the Luminans, receiving reports and issuing orders. Tidus placed a beacon on each of them, then opened his eyes. He turned to the nearest soldier. "Give me a broadcast unit," Tidus commanded, holding out his hand. The soldier hesitated, his eyes flicking to the body on the ground. Then he shoved his hand into the supply pack at his hip.
"Yes, sir,"
he said quickly, with a note of fear in his voice. He handed Tidus the broadcast unit and gave a hurried salute. Tidus raised the device to his lips and activated it. The broadcast tone sounded deafeningly over the battlefield through the drones scattered about. "Leaders of the Luminaean resistance," Tidus began. "The Emperor is merciful. If you surrender now, the bloodshed will cease. If you have not made your surrender known in the next minute, 3 of your leaders will die. Saldan Darn, Shin Seal, and Guard Yal to be precise. Tidus ended the broadcast, and Helix came up to stand at his shoulder. Locations? Tidus took his connection to the beacons he had set and split it, like separating strands of yarn, and handed one side to Helix, through the same connection they used to converse. He checked the time, counting down the seconds. His broadcast had been heard, but so far there had been no reaction. Tidus took a deep breath, closed his eyes once again, and pulled at the flow of time. Over the entirety of the battlefield, Tidus pulled time to a halt for everyone except himself and Helix. Blood poured from his nose again, and he put his arm up to staunch the flow. Helix disappeared, darting off after his targets. Tidus dropped to his knees, breathing heavily. No one would see this anyway. He could stand back up before he released the time freeze. The effort of it pressed against his skull, like claws trying to break free. Helix flashed across his perception, killing each of the targets in turn, then returned to Tidus' side. He grabbed Tidus' arm and hoisted him back to his feet. "Thanks," Tidus said. He straightened, squaring his shoulders, then released the time freeze. Tidus allowed a minute to pass, for the deaths to be discovered and word to spread amongst the Luminaeans. Then he raised the broadcaster again and activated it. "I will offer you one more chance to partake in the Emperor's mercy," he announced, keeping his voice level so his exhaustion was undetectable. "Refuse again, and you will face only his wrath." Tidus ended the broadcast and closed his eyes, scanning the battlefield. He didn't know what Jaren's strategy had been, but from what he had seen, it had been subtle manipulations of things around him. It might have worked eventually, but Tidus didn't see a reason to allow this to be drawn out any more than it already was. It was a waste of the Empire's time and blood. The battlefield changed as the deaths were made known, first in small ways, and then Luminaeans started to retreat, or those nearest to the Imperial forces dropped their weapons. Finally, the broadcast unit in Tidus' hand beeped with a notification. An incoming message. Tidus pulled up the small screen of the device and saw 2 words. "We surrender." Tidus smiled and activated the broadcast unit once more. "You will be embraced by the Empire and prosper with us," he said. "Drop your weapons, submit to a search. Anyone who resists this order will be considered a traitor to the Empire and killed on sight. Those who embrace the light of the Emperor need not fear." Tidus deactivated the broadcast unit and swayed on his feet. Helix caught him and snatched away the broadcaster. "The Admiral can handle it from here," he said. "But that was badass. How long have you had that speech ready? Did you just write up sick one-liners in your spare time or something?" Tidus laughed, leaning on his friend. "I'm just glad it worked," he confessed. "I was half expecting they wouldn't take me seriously, like my voice would crack or something." Helix laughed and wrapped his tail around Tidus' ankle. "Now that would have been a legendary first job for an Omni Tempore." Chapter 47. Tidus and Helix didn't return to their borrowed Scorpion, but to the Legion ship of Omni Tempore rank 41, the Kismet's Claw. It was larger than the Scorpion, with enough room to house a complement of soldiers, his personal guards. Those would include the soldiers Helix had knocked out and fought off while Tidus had killed Jaren. Tidus decided he would need to request new guards. This batch didn't seem quite up to the task. "Welcome to the Kismet's Claw, Tidus," the familiar voice of Timothy greeted them, and Tidus smiled. It was good to have him back. He had grown so used to the strangely personal AI that the standard issue ones felt stale and incomplete. And congratulations on earning your rank. "Thanks, Tim," Tidus said. "It's Timothy," Timothy corrected him. Helix laughed. Tidus rolled his eyes. If his father could see him, he would be proud. He had been proud when Tidus had only had the potential for this, before he'd even reached it, but he had always been proud of a lie. The truth was something he could never let his father see, and now the truth was that even earning his rank wasn't enough. He couldn't be here without Helix. Helix had saved his life and made his ranking possible. Tidus hadn't earned any of it on his own. The words of the Void Shifter slithered back into his mind.
All you did was make him suffer.
He shuddered and pushed the memory away. The shifter had meant it relating to Kiun, and it had been right. All Tidus' attempts to save Kiun had only tortured him until he'd finally died. Now he was doing the same thing to Helix, except now it was worse. Now Tidus was only trying to protect himself, to help himself, and Helix would suffer for it. When would he stop making the people he cared about suffer? Tidus went to the cockpit and sat down heavily. He chewed his lip and set course for Dothara, as an idea sloshed in his mind, slowly taking form. Helix hadn't wanted to come back from the timescape because of the constant threat, because there would always be someone trying to kill them. They would never be safe. But maybe that wasn't true, or at least maybe it didn't have to be. Maybe there was a way around it, or more accurately, a way to get on top of it. 2 hours, Helix said, looking at the timestamp on the navigation panel. Damn, void engines really are sweet. No kidding, Tidus said. He started the takeoff sequence, and Helix nudged his shoulder. Leaving behind your crew? He asked. They just let their last charge get murdered, Tidus said. I think I'll be requesting new ones. Fair. Helix flopped into the co-pilot seat and spun around in it. I just called mine up and told them to meet me at the cathedral so I can ride with you. Tidus nodded and chewed his lip. Spit it out, Helix demanded, stopping in the middle of his spin. What? I know what it looks like when you're holding something back, Helix said accusingly. Now, either spill it or go take a nap. You've still got blood on your face, you know. Okay. Tidus wiped at it again. Sorry, I've been thinking. I mean, about what you said in the timescape. Helix's ears dropped, and his shoulders slumped. He pulled his legs up onto the chair and squeezed his knees against his chest. Which thing? Helix asked. About not coming back, Tidus said. Because it'll never stop. People trying to kill us. Look, I was having a mental breakdown. Stop obsessing over it, okay? Helix looked away. Tidus pursed his lips. You know, I know what it looks like when you're lying, he said. Helix flinched. Well, what do you want me to say? Helix snapped. I came back with you, right? I'm here for you. But, I mean, yeah, still not super psyched about the constant murder threats. No, I don't want you to say anything. Tidus faltered. The idea was so dangerous, so big, it might even be impossible. But if they could do it, it would work. I might have an idea for how to not have things be the way they are, at least not forever. All right, Helix said slowly. I'm listening. Well, think about it. It's like the old draconic proverb, Tidus said, his words spilling out like he'd opened a dam. The fiercest hunter fears no hunter. We can become the fiercest hunters. Or, Omni Tempore. If we can do that, nobody will be able to come after us. They won't want to. You mean? Helix started, turning hesitantly to meet Tidus' gaze. You mean get ranks 1 and 2? Kill Magina Perrin and Argus? Not right away or anything, obviously, Tidus said. But yeah, I mean, we'd have to work our way up, get a lot stronger, but, I mean, look at what we just did. If we work together, we have something no one else has. None of the other Omni Tempore work together, not like we do. They don't trust each other enough. We already have an advantage. I suppose. Helix flicked his tail. From nerves or excitement, Tidus couldn't tell. And that conduit circle you've got doesn't hurt either. Tidus put his hand to his collarbone. He hadn't even considered that, but it was true. Magina herself had commented on how powerful it could make him if he managed to use it fully, to unleash its true potential. This sounds crazy. Helix shook his head. Tidus' gut clenched, but then Helix grinned. But, hey, why not? We can do it, Tidus said. Saying it had made it sound real, less like a dream and more like a plan. They could do it. Tidus docked the Kismet's Claw at the orbit station beside Helix's new Legion ship. The Enigma and the Kismet's Claw stood docked side by side, regal and lethal. The shuttle down to the cathedral seemed even shorter than it ever had before. The first time Tidus had made the trip, it had seemed like an eternity to reach their destination. Ever since he had first set foot on the shuttle, he had been part of a countdown of death. Tavarius, dead in the jungle. Jazz lost her mind to the strain of rapid, repeated death. Celia and Morad, missing at the hands of the Cascades. Zion, dead by Tidus' own hand. And Dasha had yet to return from the fifth trial, gone long enough now that she was presumed lost. Not dead, just lost. It was not expected that she would ever return at this point, but if Tidus knew anyone relentless enough to be held prisoner for years, drive her captors crazy every moment, and eventually walk away victorious, it was Dasha. Until that happened, if it ever did, the only one remaining from those Tidus had trained alongside, aside from Helix, was Lyn. The cathedral itself, of course, hadn't changed, but something about it felt different. Entering the large entry hall, lined with massive paintings of the Emperor Prometheus and time-casting iconography, the paintings were just as grand, just as intricate and impressive as the first time he had seen them, but they were no longer so mysterious, so indecipherable. Tidus recognized the images now, depicting a part of each of the trials. He had spent hours studying them in his first year at the cathedral, but just like time-casting itself and how his future self couldn't tell him how to use the power, studying the depictions didn't grant him an advantage practically. It was only looking back that he recognized the colorful, formless depiction of the singularity. It was only after facing it that he understood the depiction of the Void Shifter, black carapace dotted with red pustule-like eyes, and understood the mortal danger it represented. They passed the entry hall, and Tidus slowed, a presence hitting him like a gust of wind. It lit up his time sense like a solar flare, and he had to pull back his time casting so it wouldn't blind him. Helix shot him a quizzical look. "I feel something," Tidus thought at him. "Or someone. Really powerful. Do you feel it?" "I feel someone I don't recognize," Helix returned with a shrug. "Nothing that would make me almost fall over, though. I feel like I need a sun visor for my time sense." "Need a minute?" Helix asked, frowning at him. Tidus shook his head and straightened. "I'm good." He pushed forward, and Helix followed. They entered the sanctum, the source of the blinding presence. Tidus forced himself to pull back his time sense even further, leaving his vision spotty with the damage the Void Shifter had done. But right now that was preferable. He blinked to adjust his vision and met the gaze of Argus, the Praetorian member of the Omni Tempore, the most powerful timecaster in the Empire. Tidus sucked in a gasp and quickly lowered himself into a bow, one knee to the ground. Argus was tall, with a regal face and white hair that matched his feathery white wings. Tidus had never seen him before in person, not even from a distance. He had only seen pictures when he had memorized the names of the ranked Omni Tempore. The preeminent timecaster looked over them with an impenetrable golden gaze, then gestured to the glass pedestal at the front of the room.
"You may present your boons,"
he said, his voice reverberating with bass,
"and join the ranks of the Angelic Legion of the Omni Tempore."
Tidus snapped himself out of gaping, rose to his feet, and walked purposefully to the pedestal. He held out the dagger he had taken from Jaren, laying it flat on top of the pedestal. It sank into the rippling glass, and a stinging tingle pricked Tidus' palm. He turned his hand over and watched a small golden rune etch itself onto his skin. From the rune, a surge of power flowed through his skin, down to his bones and through his veins like blood. It swirled with the time particles flowing through him, like it was fusing with his time signature itself. It shifted something inside Tidus. It took him a moment to realize what it was. This was the Eternity Mark, an Ouroboros with the rune of life at its center, the final piece that stopped his aging and altered the sensation of his time signature. This was the difference he had always felt between fully ranked Omni Tempore and trainees. It was like an extra nervous system had been layered on top of the one he had, making everything around him somehow more real. He stepped back to let Helix do the same, keeping a respectful distance from Argus. Power radiated off him in waves, even when Tidus kept his time-casting entirely stifled. It pulsed with the rhythm of a heartbeat. Even regular citizens would recognize the power of this man if they encountered him. No one could be in his presence and misunderstand who he was. Being in the same room with a Praetorian was the closest you could get to encountering divinity itself. No one was closer to the Emperor Prometheus than his angels, the Praetorian Guard. His presence was almost overwhelming. How big was the power gap between Argus and Magina? Tidus swallowed his nerves as he realized he would have to find out. Personally, because that was what he needed to become. To match Ilaria's vision of him, to keep Helix safe, to make it worth it for him to have come back with Tidus. One of them would become the Praetorian. But if they could do that, if they reached that level of power, the two of them combined would be an unstoppable force. He could destroy anyone who threatened his family. No one would be a threat to them. No one would stand a chance. Anyone who mistakenly believed they did would be a simple matter to deal with. Killing them would be as easy as plucking a flower from the garden. Inconsequential. Also by C.E. Foltz. Other works in the universe of the Starforged Empire. Time, Space, and Magic, Volume 1. A collection of short stories from the Starforged Empire. Volume 1 is recommended companion reading with the Paradox Legion, containing 3 short stories from the perspective of supporting characters Ilaria, Dasha, and Helix. The Call of the Void, the thrilling sequel to the Paradox Legion, coming August of 2024. The Heart of Time, the conclusion to the Omni Tempore trilogy, coming 2025. Author's Note. In the year 2020, I and the rest of the world was suffering from the isolation and anxieties that came with the COVID lockdowns. I had to change jobs during this time in order to not entirely lose my mind, and was desperate for social interaction. I am an extrovert, unlike many writers that I know, and I crave social experiences, even when the world isn't experiencing an unprecedented pandemic. Luckily for me, at this time, an old high school friend got on Facebook and started looking for a group to play Dungeons and Dragons with. I jumped at the chance, along with another high school classmate of ours, and 3 others that I didn't know before that. We worked out our schedules and started meeting up every week for a game of Dungeons and Dragons, and oh boy, it was fun. We started with a rather short campaign of self-destructively evil characters who were entertaining but doomed from the start. And when they inevitably TPK'd, total party kill, for the uninitiated, we brought in a much more heroic band of adventurers to play with. The friend who originally reached out to start this group would become my husband before long, and this group is still going strong. We finished that first campaign and started up a new one, set in the same universe, but thousands and thousands of years in the future, because we wanted to play with space travel and aliens now. We switched game systems entirely at this point, and that is a long story I shan't bore you with here. But if you were in the TTRPG community in January of 2023, you can probably guess. So we started our new campaign with new characters, and so much more fun to discover. In about October of that year, our game master was giving us art for places and characters we would encounter, and I was eating it up. I asked him one day, "When are you going to write a book about these guys?" Because there was so much fun world-building and potential, I could taste it. He told me he liked building the world and running games, but wasn't interested in writing a book. So I made a proposal. November was coming up, and some of you will know what that means. NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Month. A community novel writing experience where every year thousands of crazy writers decide to try and write a 50,000-word draft of a novel in just 30 days. So I suggested to my friend, what if we collaborate? What if I write a book in this world, and you can feed me this delicious world building for me to run with? I can try it for NaNoWriMo, see how we like it, and if either of us doesn't want to keep going, I always have other books I can write. And so the Star-Forged Empire collection was born. I used October to plot and plan for this book, and in November of 2023, I drafted 82,000 words of what would become the Paradox Legion. Once I got started, there was no stopping me. I quickly had plans for not only the Omni Tempore trilogy, but in multiple other stories in this universe. At the time I write this, I have 7 books in the planning stages for the Star-Forged Empire. When I finished drafting the Paradox Legion, I had the best feeling. I had finally done it. I had finally written the kind of book I had always dreamed of writing, the kind of book I have been working towards since I was 8 years old and first realized that I was an author at heart. It is the culmination of so much of my life. So many relationships and experiences have led me here. Mysterious reader, thank you for joining me on this journey, and welcome. There's more where this came from. Our journey has just begun. About the author. C.E. Foltz knew she wanted to be an author at an early age, started writing at the age of 8 and never stopped. Born from a family of writers, it seems in some ways an inevitability. Growing up all over the United States, her heart resides in the forests of Tennessee, where she spent a large portion of her childhood. Currently residing in Utah, she is a foster parent, dog mom, and hot chocolate enthusiast. This has been The Paradox Legion, Star-Forged Empire, Omni Tempore, Book 1, written by C.E. Foltz, narrated by Benjamin Fife. Copyright 2024 by C.E. Foltz. Production copyright by C.E. Foltz.